I'm Janet Morano, the Executive Director of Priests for Life. Welcome to Just Ask Janet. Well, I know normally you hear me talk a lot about abortion, but today we're going to change it up just a little bit. And we're going to discuss two very important topics that unfortunately a lot of people don't know much about. We're going to be speaking about euthanasia and assisted suicide. So right away you might be saying, well, Janet, what's the difference? Well, I have a wonderful expert here who's come all the way from Canada to be with us here at our Priest for Life office. And he has been working tirelessly on this issue, both in Canada and in the United States. So I'm welcoming to the program Alex Schudenberg of the
Euthanasia
Prevention Coalition.
Good to see you, Jen.
Nice
Excellent.
to have you. So, of course, up in Canada right now, it's freezing cold. And here in Florida, it's nice weather, isn't it?
Well, you'll notice the sunburn on my face. I've been in Florida a couple of days now. and
Enjoying the sunshine,
Well,
right?
I'm a runner, so when you go out running in the sun, obviously you really soak up the sun, especially when
right.
your face isn't used to the sun. So, yes.
That's great. Well, of course, as I said, we're going to talk about euthanasia and assisted suicide. First of all, a lot of people think, well, isn't that the same thing? And it's not. So why don't we start with, tell us what euthanasia is.
Right. So euthanasia and assisted suicide, they're like two similar issues, but they're different. So euthanasia is when somebody would lethally inject you or they're causing your death. So it's a homicide. So I'll give you a prime example. In Canada, we have legalized euthanasia. Now they call it medical aid in dying just to make everyone feel good about it. But they've legalized euthanasia. So that means the doctor will lethally inject that person with the drugs and cause their death. And how they did it, if you look at our Canada's criminal code, it makes it very clear. They created an exception to homicide in our criminal code. Homicide, of course, is murder. They created an exception to murder in our criminal code in order to allow euthanasia, which is the same thing they did in the Netherlands when they legalized euthanasia. They created an exception in the criminal code to murder. So it's a form of murder. And as I say, I always say to people to explain it to you very clearly, that on, in Canada, we legalized euthanasia on June the 17th, 2016. That means on June the 16th, 2016, it was murder. On June the 17th, it became medical aid in dying. So now what makes it different from assisted suicide is the question you would say, well, they're actually two birds of a feather and they do flock together. But nonetheless, the fact is that in the case of assisted suicide, you would take the same lethal drugs, but I would then give it to Janet, for instance, and Janet would have to take it herself.
Right.
So one is done by lethal injection. So the doctor or the nurse is doing it to you, whereas the other is that you take it yourself. So what makes it similar is you've got somebody who's directly involved with causing your death. Now, some would say that assisted suicide is a lesser crime because it's not actually the action per se of another person, but it is the direct involvement of another person. But morally speaking, they're the same thing because the intention is to cause death. So, and there's another confusion a lot of people have. They'll say, isn't this the same as giving somebody a massive overdose of morphine? Well, it could be the same thing, but when we're doing euthanasia or assisted suicide, they're actually prescribing specific drugs for that purpose to cause your death.
Well, what kind of drugs do they prescribe?
Well, there's actually, I don't want to get into this too much actually,
no,
but there's actually,
isn't there like a cocktail?
There's a cocktail, and actually that's a whole other topic to get into especially in the US. But that we should get into in a minute. First, we should first go through this issue. They actually do three different things, right? They give you a drug that prevents you from throwing up, because the problem with these drugs is they're so harsh that even if you are injected or you're given they put it through they connect it to you through a IV, etc., that it's so harsh to the body that people will, they throw up, and then they give a second drug to prevent you from going into convulsions, because the drugs are so harsh that people often will go into convulsions. And if you read those early studies out of the Netherlands, when they started doing this in the Netherlands, they talked about this high rate of problem with it. People throwing up. Obviously, they didn't die when they threw up, because what happened is they threw up the drugs, or they threw, the body would expel, or they went into these heavy convulsions, and all these families would be shocked. The person's convulsing, and they'd be thinking how terrible this is. So of course they had to give you drugs to prevent you. So what they actually do is they put you in a type of a paralysis.
Paralysis
is what they're doing. And then the third drug is to kill you. Now, they say that the third drug is actually to shut down the heart. That's how the other side says it, but it's actually not true. What the third drug does is it actually affects the lungs. So what happens is the lungs stop, moving. And so it forces the lungs to fill up with fluid. So it's actually a death which is similar to drowning, not as they've always sold it. They talk about it as shutting down the heart, but in fact what it does is
So they're not stopping your heart.
no, the drug does not stop the heart per se. It will affect the heart, certainly. But what it actually does is it causes the lungs to stop activating, to stop working, which fills them up with fluid. And that's why often one of the side effects of this, which upsets people, is the person gasping. Well, because their lungs are filling up with fluid.
And they're drowning.
They're drowning. So what's happened is they've been put into this type of a paralysis state. So when you look, for instance, I'll give you an example. When you look at the Oregon data, because Oregon's had assisted suicide since about 1998 legal, they're happening, right? Which is a long time, okay? But the fact of it is, you look at the Oregon data, it talks about some of these deaths happening very quickly. But these drugs actually don't kill you that quickly. What happens is someone might go into this deep coma quickly. That's true. But the body sometimes takes longer to die. And that's a whole nother point. But when they're in coma, someone might mark them off as being dead. But in fact, they're not dead yet. They're dying, yes.
Right.
And the drugs will kill them. But anyway, so here's the whole point. We're intentionally killing someone. People say, "Oh, this is about my freedom, Alex. I'm going through this difficult time. I might be nearing death, or I might be going through difficult chronic conditions, and I'd rather be dead than alive." And the point is, well, that's a serious thing, and we should be caring for you, and we should be doing what we can to help you. But assisted suicide is now saying in society it's okay for somebody else now to directly cause your death. So this is about killing somebody. That's what it's about. And whether it's assisted suicide or euthanasia, the intention is to kill.
Right. And isn't it very often, I mean, when people kind of feel like, oh, I wish I would die, they're suffering with cancer or something, or, something that is so painful. And then the family is watching them in pain and they're anguishing. But isn't it because the person is basically more depressed at that moment as to why they might say, oh, okay, yeah, kill me, or do what you have to do, right?
Right. So often these people, obviously the laws usually say that you have to be terminally ill, but that's not true. They don't actually say that per se. I'll give you an example. In Oregon, they have this, you must be 6 months. You have to have a 6-month prognosis. But how do you determine a 6-month prognosis? Like, what does that actually mean? It means that
so like if the doctor says, oh, you have lung cancer, I give you 6 months to live.
Right. Yeah. But that's so variable. Who knows?
Of course.
But in most jurisdictions that doesn't exist. So in Canada, there is no 6-month prognosis. In fact, you could have mental illness in Canada and die by euthanasia, which is a sad reality. In the Netherlands, it's the same way, and same with Belgium, etc. But in Oregon, in the U.S., which is probably what you're more concerned about, they have that 6-month definition. So you're looking at that and you say, oh, these people are dying anyway, etc. So it's normal that maybe they'd want to live. I mean, they'd not want to die this way because we're actually then relieving their suffering, is how it's sold. But a recent study came out of Ireland, and it was an excellent study because Ireland's also debating euthanasia, and you might have already known that they were debating it. They had a bill a couple of years ago that was defeated. It went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said no. So they've been going on. So a study was done of people who were asking for death, so people who were actually seeking death, which sadly is not uncommon, part of the human condition, someone going through difficult health conditions. So
they use that phrase. So I wish I would just die already. I can't take it anymore. Right.
And so they did a massive study in Ireland, and the results just came out showing that people who had asked to die, 75% of the time they were very lonely, and 60% of the time they were seriously depressed. So now you start attaching that data to what's going on in states like Oregon and Washington State, et cetera, where assisted suicide is legal. You start realizing this is heavily related to people who have depression, who are very, very lonely, who are feeling that their life has lost purpose and value, which is all a normal human reality. Like, let's think about what it means to be human. And this is the problem I have with euthanasia and assisted suicide. It's about killing, but it's also, how would you say, it negates the nature of the human person, because it's normal for me, if I'm going through a difficult health condition, to at times feel that my life has lost purpose and hope. That's normal. I'm not saying that that's a good reason to kill someone. I'm saying it's a normal human response.
Reaction, right.
And now when you legalize this, suddenly that becomes the time when someone then dies by lethal injection or by lethal drugs. And we're saying that's all about freedom. And this is the biggest lie, of course, of all. And I came to this comment about freedom. And I say, they say all this is about freedom. There's no freedom when somebody is lethally injecting you. When someone's putting lethal drugs into your bloodstream, when did that become freedom? That's about murder is what that is. And when it's assisted suicide, often these people are very vulnerable, and what they need is good care, good support, or simply, how would you say, a system which recognizes as a human being, we must be with you and recognize that this time you might be suicidal. Suicidal ideation, sadly, as I say, is not a new human problem. It's always been a human problem at certain times in one's life. But nonetheless, now we kill them. And then they say that's about freedom. No, what it's really about, of course, Janet, is abandonment.
Abandonment, yeah.
We're abandoning people
Sure we
in their
are.
time of need.
Yeah.
Then they talk about pain. Well, pain is the flag they wave. That's the sales point for them.
We have even pain management doctors now.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a whole medical profession right now. And so there's really no reason why, whatever you're suffering from, we have drugs who can minimize your pain, right?
So I'm not in a situation where I'm going to say that nobody experiences pain, but the data shows that there's very few people are actually asking for euthanasia in the Netherlands or in Canada, or assisted suicide in states where it's legal here in the US, because they have uncontrolled pain. There's very few people. And you see that, you can even look at the Oregon reports, the yearly reports. One of the questions is, pain, and you see the number. That's always the lowest number. People are asking for what reason? Loss of autonomy, loss of the ability to do things that you have found joy in, and things like that. So these are, how would you say, disability type related responses. I have a loss of things that I do in my life, etc., that I enjoy because of my health conditions. But pain is always near the bottom, and the reason is that very few people are actually asking for this because of pain. Now, fear of pain is a very high reason why people might ask for it. So, for instance, someone who might have cancer, they might be uncomfortable, etc., but they might have fear of future pain, or fear of suffering, or even fear of death.
Right.
They have a fear of what is to come. They might have a great fear of existential what's happening, right? And so therefore they want to have their life ended. It's more so that than anything to do with actual pain. But there is some cases of pain. I'm not going to in any way say there isn't. But even in those cases, there's nothing morally wrong with putting somebody into a sleep. I'm not talking about a sleep to kill them, but a sleep to relieve them of their pain, than to kill them. Exactly. And there is a clear moral difference, and people can argue all they want about it, but there's a clear moral difference between putting someone into a sedation rather than killing them.
Right. And then, I mean, the whole danger to me about all this too is you can have a patient in a hospital and maybe they don't want to be killed.
Right.
But doesn't this open the door where the medical doctors can determine that this life is no longer worth living? And it's like giving them a license to kill, isn't it?
It is. It gives them a license to kill. And actually, this is the other big thing about it. When you look at the laws, so here's the important thing. Someone will say, oh, it's my body, my choice, Alex. This is what I want. And I'm saying, well, actually, the law doesn't work that way. When you actually look at what the bills say, so you look at the Oregon law, the Washington state law, the Vermont law, they're all about the same thing. You must request it. Okay, you must request it. Well, there's many reasons I might request to have my life ended. I might be going through deep depression, existential distress, whatever it might be. There's many reasons I might ask to have my life ended. That doesn't mean there's a good reason to end my life. But secondly speaking, the laws actually define what the doctor must do in order to cause my death. So if you actually look at the Oregon law, it says, well, there must be 2 requests. There must be this. There must be a second doctor who also approves. The second doctor doesn't have to ever visit you.
No?
The second doctor only would have to look at your medical record and say, yes, what the first doctor has agreed to is reasonable. Okay? That's all
so
the
he's
second.
never met the patient even.
He might, but he doesn't have to. Doesn't have to, right? And then the whole thing comes about, oh, well, maybe this person's having some psychological distress. So then the law says that they must be sent for a psychiatric or psychological assessment. Now, those are done online, but even then, they're almost never done. I always point out that last year in Oregon, there was only 3 times when somebody was sent for a psychiatric or psychological assessment. So you're telling me that of all these assisted suicide deaths in Oregon, only 3 times was there somebody actually experiencing psychological, psychiatric type distress when they're asking to have their life ended. You tell me that.
So Alex, about how many people a year in Oregon die of assisted suicide?
Okay, I don't have the data right in front of me, which is sort of awkward, but I can say that
Roughly.
that a couple years ago it was 245.
That
okay?
many?
Yeah, that many. And Oregon's not that big a state.
Right.
So when we're talking about states like California or that more recently legalized assisted suicide, their numbers are much higher. But of course, it's still growing in California, sadly. So the numbers are much higher, but it's also because the state is much larger.
More
But let me give you
population.
a more a better way to look at it. Sadly, Canada legalized euthanasia in 2016, and it's become the big rave. You know, they're selling it now in a big way. Let me get into this. I had a supporter contact me recently, and she was all upset because her husband, who was dying, 5 times he was asked, "Do you want MAID?" And she's like, the first time you get the request by some doctor, you're thinking, oh, well, you know, the doctor must feel like he has to ask that in order to make sure it's on the medical record. No, this person does not want euthanasia, medical aid in dying. Remember, I said they call it MAID to make us all feel better.
Uh-huh.
You know, they say, "Oh, do you want a MAID?" I can't afford a MAID, so no. I mean, do you want
Medical
no? It's
aid in
medical aid in
dying.
dying. Well, medical aid in dying. Well, it's a term to make us all feel good about killing. Anyway, she says, and the next doctor came, and then a nurse came in, and another doctor came in. Before you know, she says, "I've been asked 5 times," and I said, "It's insane because, of course, they're now selling euthanasia. They look at someone who's dying, they're thinking, oh, maybe this would be better." You know, I'll give you an example. I had a call.
Well, I think what it is like, well, get on with it already. You're going to
Well, they're
die
looking
soon
at this
anyway,
person
so
and they're
hurry
saying
up.
to him, well, maybe you'd be better off dead.
Yeah.
And they're looking at him thinking, well, if I look like you, maybe I'd want MAID. Well, you know, every time you ask someone, of course, if this person wasn't so opposed, they're upset because they're being asked.
Right.
But if this person wasn't so
They
opposed,
would
maybe
cave in.
they'd be thinking, oh, maybe MAID is the right thing for me.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you a story. I got a call several months ago from a woman. She calls me up, and we have a helpline. So, and the phone was being forwarded to me at that time, and I answered the phone. The woman says, you know, I got to tell you, my husband was a pro-life leader. This is a Canadian. He was a pro-life leader in the 90s. He's been active in pro-life. We're Christians, and my husband's been asking for euthanasia. He was in hospice.
Wow.
Not to shock your listeners anymore. He was in a Catholic hospice, but sadly, okay, he's in hospice. He's asking for euthanasia, and she says this doesn't make any sense. You know, this is not part of his values. This is never what he's believed. He's always been opposed.
Right.
Why now? He was a pro-life leader.
Uh-huh.
Why is he asking for euthanasia? And she didn't know. So we talked about it for a long time, and she did then. We had a long discussion on how to talk to him about it and everything. In the end, he did die a natural death. After her husband died a natural death, the one nurse came up to her and said, well, you know, I want you to know that he was really in distress a few days ago. And I sat down in the middle of the night with him, and we had a conversation for about 2 hours. And at the end of that conversation, he agreed to have MAID. So I'm surprised that he didn't, you know, and the woman here shocked me. Well, now I found out why he was asking for MAID. You know, he's going through he's nearing death. She said to me, you know, he's not quite competent anymore. Like he's really in and out of his.
And this person was selling it.
He's emotionally really distressed right now. He's going through a lot of ending of life angst issues, which is sort of normal. And now she's selling him medical aid in dying. And at first he was saying no to her, and then she convinces him after about 2 hours in the middle of the night, by the way.
When you're tired.
When you're tired and the rest of it.
Right.
That maybe this was the best idea for him. So this is the kind of thing that goes on when you have it legal. And of course, who's going to know different? Because how the law works is that, you know, somebody you get the doctor in Canada, it's a doctor and a nurse that can approve it, or 2 nurses or whatever, because it can be done by nurses in Canada. But let us say it's Oregon. You've got someone who's going through a difficult time, and now they're being talked into it because someone's thinking, oh, maybe this is the best thing for you. And that's when they're in a very vulnerable time of their life. They're very vulnerable. Consider even further. During the COVID times, which is starting to be opened up now. But anyway, you weren't allowed to visit people in the hospital. So let's say your elderly father is in the hospital and he's going through a really difficult time.
And they're trying to convince him.
Yeah, and he's in emotional distress and everything. So when I looked at the recent euthanasia numbers of Canada, which increased by 30% last year.
Wow.
You start thinking, well, what's going on here?
Exactly.
Right? So anyway, it's become something once they normalize it. But let me get into the final thing. They call it medical treatment now. So what's happening in the U.S. is the assisted suicide lobby is working very hard to try and get assisted suicide seen as medical treatment. Now, why is that? Well, if it's medical treatment, Well, then it's something different than killing. It's a type of a treatment. And then also what it means is that everyone should have the opportunity or at least access to it
Medical
because it's
treatment.
treatment, right?
Right.
So therefore
Yeah.
you have this medical condition, you have the right to
Right.
know what your options are. Well, if it's medical treatment, then everyone wants to know their
So
options.
currently now in the United States, how many states have legalized assisted suicide?
Well, sadly, you're at around 10 now states. You're at 10 states and then Washington, D.C. So
What do you, can you
your
what are
case,
the 10?
well, Oregon, Washington State, I don't have the list in front of me, California, Vermont, Colorado, you have New Mexico, which was last year, sadly. So I said you have DC, you have, and this is
What
awkward
about
because
Hawaii?
Hawaii, yes, you got, sorry, yes, Hawaii. And so you have
Because
Montana.
I know where all the liberal,
That's right.
where little pockets are, right?
That's exactly it, actually, sadly.
Yeah.
As I said, California has it.
And so
You have Montana, but Montana has it and doesn't have it. So what happened in Montana, they had a court decision, which was the Baxter court decision. And the court, the Supreme Court of Montana said that the doctor, so they didn't actually legalize assisted suicide. What they said is that the doctor could use the defensive consent. So Janet dies by assisted suicide in Montana, but the doctor's got proof you consented. Therefore, defensive consent was available to be used in Montana, and that's how they did it. So that's pretty bad. But anyway, you've got 10 states. You've got then DC also, and it's being pushed hard. Right now, the assisted suicide lobby is really interested in New York and Massachusetts. They're pushing very, very hard. Maryland, they're pushing hard right now. They just lost in Virginia, which was good. They just lost there, but they're in Delaware. They got it through committee, and it's going to be debated in the House, etc. So they're pushing very hard in quite a few states right now. They're really focusing a lot on the eastern U.S. at the moment.
Eastern Seaboard, yeah.
Yeah, well, they seem to have really set up shop there with some key. They put in a ton of money, and I think one of the reasons was they were pushing very hard in New York. So if you've got New York as your base, sort of for your campaign, then you start picking off the states around there too, where you're trying to legalize it because those are smaller states.
So if people want to do something to help stop this, in their state, or maybe they're from those states, what can they do?
Well, the first thing is you need to talk to your legislators, and there's a lot of confusion about this. Just like I said from the beginning, I always say the first thing you need to do is always call it what it is. The other side wants to call it aid in dying. They want to call it, medical whatever. They want to tell you that this is nice and fine and good and whatever. No, tell them what it is. Secondly, I always say,
so what phrase should they use?
It's assisted suicide. We're assisting a suicide.
Okay, you're helping someone kill themselves, basically.
Yeah, we're involved with killing people, and don't be afraid to use the word
use
killing.
The phrase you're helping to kill somebody.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. You're approving the killing of somebody. Yeah, absolutely, without a question. The second thing is, I always, and this is something I should have gone into earlier. I did a little bit talk about how it actually works, and I have some excellent articles about that because they say, oh, this is all about a death with dignity. No, the assisted suicide lobby in the U.S. has been working for the last several years very hard on a cheap way to kill you. So they've been coming up with these new drug cocktails to do it in a cheap manner because they want an inexpensive killing formula, right? But what it's resulted in is these very long, drawn-out deaths, and it's resulted in also situations where you have a lot of painful deaths. So what happens is the one drug they're using right now actually burns your throat. So they talk, yeah, it does. So they talk about this in the data, and you see this actually in some of these articles that I've written about it, where someone says, my wife died by assisted suicide. Da, 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 da. It was terrible. It went on for hours, and her throat was burning, and da 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 da. And I'm thinking, well, they give her the sedative in order to put her into a sleep. Why? Well, because it's going to burn her throat so heavy, you don't want to hear her screaming. And these are the things of the reality. Now, a recent article written by the one assisted suicide doctor out of California, he was saying, well, it seems inhumane that we use this drug, but this drug is inexpensive and very effective. So when you ask the patient, do you want an effective way that might kill you very effectively, or do you want some other drug which wouldn't have this problem but may not really work as effectively? And he says, well, our patients will always say, we want the effective way to die. Well, this is craziness. It's insane. It's insane. It's all insane. And then they tell you, oh, it's a death with dignity. It's a lie. It's about abandoning people. We talk about actually wanting a caring society. Let's get down to what it really means to care for someone. When did killing become a caring thing? Like, come on, let's be brutally honest about this. And we have to really think about this even further and say, what does this do to society as a whole when you're involved with having your doctors then become the killers?
Yeah, that's.
It's not safe.
Well, I always tell everybody, never sign any paperwork in a hospital at all. Like all this, they want a DNR and a DNI, and
Yeah.
do not resuscitate, do not intubate. Don't sign any of that stuff at all.
Well, for instance, a lot of people will have a healthcare proxy document. And they should do that ahead of time. There's good pro-life documents, and they should do that ahead of time. And then the best documents are the ones where you actually appoint someone to make medical decisions for you.
Well, that's what I have. It's called a will to live.
That's right.
And we have that on our Priest for Life website.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can go to priestforlife.org/will to live, and we have them state by state. And it's just what you're saying, Alex. You appoint someone who knows your wishes and your good Catholic morals and all that, and will make the correct decisions only if you can't verbalize them yourself.
So why am I going into this? Because a lot of people have a healthcare proxy document,
right?
And so it might not be a quite assisted suicide or euthanasia what we're talking about, but what they'll often do is they'll appoint their oldest son or their oldest daughter to be their medical decision maker, but their older son or oldest daughter might not in any way share their values anymore.
Exactly.
So these documents, what happens? They become legal in place when you're incapable of making decisions for yourself, and you've then appointed someone who you might love dearly, but who doesn't share your values. And now you're in a situation where the question is, should we do A or B for mom? And your son or daughter who doesn't share your values is going to do this, make the decision that you would not agree with at all.
Right.
Now let's go one step further. If this becomes seen as medical treatment, which has happened in Canada, which is being pushed for right now in the US, suddenly those healthcare proxy documents take on new power over issues like assisted suicide. Because if it becomes seen as medical treatment, which is, as I say, the assisted suicide lobby is pushing for, then it becomes something that a healthcare proxy could make a decision on in the future.
Wow.
This is the problem, of course, with making these things into medical treatment issues, because then obviously it's an option if it's a treatment, isn't it? It's always an option.
Yeah, and I always tell people the person you appoint does not have to be a blood relative.
No.
It could be someone who is very strong, well-educated, and knows your morals.
I always tell them, appoint your best friend who you know very well, or somebody who's in the Catholic women's group at the church, or someone who you know very well.
And will fight for you.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So Alex, what's the website they can go? Because I'm sure people are now intrigued. I want to study this more. I want to learn more. I want to know up to the minute what's going here in the U.S. and how I can help.
There's two excellent places. The first place is Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. And it's easy to find by Googling. It gets so many hits, it's ridiculous. So it's easy to find. You put it Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, it pops right up. But I also have a blog, and the blog is the world's most comprehensive source of information on these issues in the world. And like any blog, on the right-hand side, it has all the topics. So if you live in Oregon or something, then you can just hit Oregon and you hear all the stories about what's happening in Oregon, etc. And
what's
whatever.
The blog?
And the blog is Alex Schadenberg, though, blogspot.com. But you can find it by going to the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition website, and you look at that funny-looking face in the left-hand corner, you click on it, and there you're at the blog.
Okay. Well, Alex, thank you for joining me for a great discussion.
Thank you very much.
Okay. God bless you. Well, brothers and sisters, I hope you go to those websites, and really the life you save may be your own. Thank you, and God bless.
I will be silent no more.